Hi, my name's Rob McIver, and a special warm welcome to everybody in the room, everybody on Zoom, and anybody that watches it in the future to the 2024 conference of the, and we've got to get this right, AHSRA, the Adventist Human Subjects Researchers Association, and we're meeting at Andrews University. We've got a very interesting program, and tonight we're beginning with a special invitation, special presentation by President Taylor, and we have somebody more important than I am to introduce the President. Gary.
I'm Gary Burdick. I am Dean of Research here at Andrews University. AHSRA began when David Trim at the GC said, I would like to get everybody that's doing church-sponsored research together in one place at one time. And so Andrews University, we said we'd love to host that. And so we had that meeting here. And from that, the group decided that they wanted to form an association. Dwayne McBride was instrumental in getting the GC to agree on the name, Adventist Human Subjects Researchers Association Conference. I think it's about a one-year task to do that.
Lots of lawyers.
But it succeeded. And so we have been very grateful the many times that we have hosted the conference here. It is my pleasure to welcome as our opening keynote speaker, John Wesley Taylor V, our university president. He's been president now for almost 1 year. I have to read this to make sure I get this right. Degrees come in twos for him. He has a bachelor's degree in health science and religion. He has master's degrees in educational administration and instructional technology, and doctorates in curriculum and instruction and educational psychology and research. So one is not sufficient. He has to have 2 masters, 2 doctorates. But it makes him the perfect person for an academic institution like ours to be really thinking about research and the philosophy of research. So today he is going to talk about some of his vision as far as research and the Adventist Church. Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Burdick and Dr. McIver, for the warm welcome, and a special welcome to each of you. It's good to see you here. Andrews University is a perfect place to host this conference, the Adventist Human Subjects Researchers Association. And Andrews University has been involved in significant research for many years, we can probably say many decades, and has contributed in multiple disciplines, from journals that are published here at Andrews University to significant research that has had an impact, not only in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but around the world in many different venues. So welcome, we're glad you're here. And today, in harmony with the theme of the conference, I thought that we would talk together a bit about our data and our interpretations of that data and how these make a difference. So we can begin, I think, with a passage in Scripture. Actually, a chapter that's found toward the end of the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 25. And it presents, Jesus Christ talks about 3 parables. We might call them parables of the kingdom. These are all familiar stories, the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, and what people did with those talents. And it closes out with the parable of the sheep and goats. Now, the reason I'm starting with Matthew 25 is each of these parables has a key message. And I'd like to highlight, just briefly, each of those. First of all, the parable of the 10 virgins. Succinctly, let the light shine. What you have needs to be shared. The second parable, the parable of the talents. The message here is, add value to what you do. Don't just take something and bury it and just say, well, this got me a degree, this got me a promotion, I put this on my CV, I did this research. Use it to add value to the community, to the church, beyond. And the third parable, the parable of the sheep and the goats, and it talks about in that parable what makes the difference between being a sheep or being a goat, and in essence, make a difference. Do something to make a positive difference on people's lives. Now, the reason that Matthew 25 is so important right now at this conference is that each of these three parables, the message of each parable is the role of research. You stop and think about it. Let the light shine. Research is to add to the fund of knowledge, to be distributed, disseminated, add value to what we do, make sure that it is making in some way a contribution. And finally, that should be a positive difference. And you should be able to tell the difference in people's lives, in society, in the church, because of the research. So, Matthew 25 seems to be a good place to start. Let's then move to that first element, which is actually a theme in this conference. Our data make a difference. So, I'd like to start by mentioning some examples. One example is, and I know many of you know, Dr. Jane Thayer, Professor Emerita here at Andrews University. Amongst the various research that she did over her career was to develop the Christian Spiritual Perception Profile, the CSPP. This is an instrument that has been used in Adventist universities as well as other institutions, particularly faith-based higher ed, globally, to set up programs that would foster spiritual growth among students. And to this day, it is frequently requested permission to be utilized in research studies, including many PhD students from non-Adventist seminaries. It led to a second instrument, a shorter scale that is often used as a part of larger research. It was developed in collaboration with Dr. Jerry Thayer and Andrews University undergraduate religion faculty. It's a 15-item scale that's used as a proxy for spirituality in instruments that measure various facets of student growth. Example of a researcher whose research makes a difference. Here's another example. Again at Andrews University, Dr. Anaris Corianavia, a team of other colleagues, some at Andrews University, some at La Sierra University, conducted the Strengthening Adventist Education Study. This is a foundational study that formed the basis for recommendations that went to the NAD Council meeting in October of 2016 and contributed to a redesign and a fresh approach to Adventist education throughout the North American division. It also increased awareness regarding the importance of pastor and teacher relationships, which led in part right here at Andrews University to the theological seminary establishing a faculty position to help pastors to understand that they are part of a ministry team that involves education, Adventist education. And that research was featured as the bedrock of an entire Journal of Adventist Education issue. And because of the impact and what came about as a result of that issue, Ministry Magazine dedicated an entire issue and featured again this research in an issue that was distributed widely across the world. In fact, I think in Australia, Dr. McIver in the South Pacific Division, this was reprinted, this issue, and distributed quite widely, as I recall. At La Sierra University, many of you are familiar with the work of Lisa Kiddo and the cognitive Genesis study. It was conducted by CRAE, the Center for Research on K-12 Adventist Education. It was a longitudinal study that took place between 2006 and 2009. About 800 participants in the United States, Canada, and Bermuda. 800 schools, 52,000 participants in grades 3 to 9, and also grade 11. Some of the results, by the way, of the study, just as an interest, the results indicated that students in Seventh-day Adventist schools surpassed the national average on standardized tests in all subject areas. Not only that, for all grade levels. Not only that, for all school sizes, and regardless of ability level. Significant findings. And you say, okay, how did this make a difference? Well, one of the things that happened as a result, and you can see here that it was called the Adventist school effect. The longer you were in an Adventist school, the greater the difference from the norms. So what was one of the results? Well, one of the results was, and some of you have probably seen this movie, it's called The Blueprint. It was a PBS documentary by Martin Doblmeier, who a very well-known documentary filmmaker, and this has been aired quite extensively on the PBS network and been viewed around the world. It was based, or it came about because of the cognitive Genesis research study. And as a result, right now, as an outgrowth of the cognitive Genesis study, is the optimizing student growth study. In fact, you're going to see some of the first preliminary results from that study. It does look at both achievement and ability with the MAP and the COGAT, but it also includes a worldview component. And the worldview component has to do with how people make major decisions. And there are basically 4 paradigms, worldview paradigms: others first, rules first, me first, and feelings first. Now, the interesting thing is that in terms of the preliminary results from the study, you'll see it here on the next slide, there is a significant difference for those who have an others first worldview. Compared to the other worldviews there were significant differences in language, reading, and science. And more likely, as the rest of the data is gathered, math may also become statistically significant. So you can see that one study, a cognitive genesis study, not only resulted in the development, for example, of a major documentary film, but it continues to spawn other research. David Trim, director of the Office of Archive, Statistics, and Research at the General Conference, and one of those who we just mentioned as a founder and a pioneer in the area of human subjects research in the Adventist Church. He and his team have been conducting, and one of those studies I know Dr. McIver has been working with over the last 4 years for significant data gathering. Yes. Lots of people in the room are involved in that study. The Global Member Study, which is one of those studies, was actually the basis for the development of the I Will Go strategic plan that currently is in place. Some of the additional research identified concerns such as the growing number of members who believe in life after death, current initiatives that are high priority and focused for the Seventh-day Adventist Church grew directly out of this research. Identification of a sizable number of individuals with disabilities resulted in the church establishing the Possibilities Ministry, currently headed by Elder Doug Vinn. And that grew directly out of the findings of the study. A personal anecdote. Back here at Andrews University, a number of years ago, mid-'80s, I conducted a research study. It was called The Self-Concept of Homeschooling Children. At that time, it was a population that had had very little study. There was only one significant study that had been conducted previously, and it took a look at academic achievement of homeschooling children, by the way, also at Andrews University. This particular study utilized the Peirce-Harris Children's Self-Concept Scale. It used a randomized sample, about 500 for the mailing list, of two of the largest national homeschooling agencies at that time, the Hewitt Research Foundation, which was headed up by, some of you may recognize the name Raymond Moore. Yes, Dr. Raymond Moore headed that up. He spent time, by the way, here at Andrews University as well. And the Holt Associates. This is John Holt, and you might have heard of the deschooling movement. He was the leader of that. Combined, they had about 45,000 members. At that time, today, that would be a very small number of homeschoolers. At that time, that was huge. That was a large part of the homeschooling population. Probably the most significant finding of the study is that half of the respondents scored at or above the 91st percentile on the normative values. 91st percentile is just off the maps because, as you know, typically we'd be talking about a 50th percentile if it's at the norms. Only about 10% scored below the 50th percentile. So what happened as a result of this particular study that we conducted here at Andrews University back in the mid-'80s? Well, the impact was that, first of all, we were asked to serve as expert witnesses on the topic of homeschooling for both legislative assemblies across a variety of states here in the United States, and also in court as an expert witness. I've been in court multiple times as a witness. And so that was a very interesting, which, by the way, resulted in more benevolent laws being enacted by legislatures and courts making favorable decisions regarding homeschooling, which allowed many more individuals to be able to participate in the phenomenon, because many states at this time allowed homeschooling, but only if you were a certified teacher, which eliminated most parents from educating their own children, because many of them were not certified teachers. And to this day, if you open up a book or read a study on homeschoolers, it will cite this study as one of the foundational studies, because self-concept is connected to the socialization of young children as well. More recently, I was involved also in you might call it a type of meta-analysis of 7 studies on the relationship between Adventist education and whether young people from Adventist families would join or remain in the church. And these studies began in about the mid-'80s, late '80s, and spanned 3 decades. So they were distributed across time. They were in different contexts. Some of them were regional settings. There was one study, for example, that focused on Adventist young people in the Lake Union. Another one was on the West Coast. Another one was in the Southern Union. But others were global, especially some of the more recent ones have been a global studies. Some were multi-year studies. The Value Genesis study, for example, took place at 3 10-year intervals. Some of them followed the same students longitudinally from the time they were adolescents till they were young adults, 25 to 30. And the question was, did they still stay in the church? And how different was that? Some were quantitative, and a couple of them included significant qualitative, like focus group interviews and that type of thing. So I took a look at these 7 studies, and as a result, we found a consistent relationship across each of the 7 studies in terms of the participation of children and youth in Adventist education and the accession and retention in the church. In fact, the longer they were involved in elementary or secondary education, the more years, the more likely they would remain in the church. So retention increased. Now, that particular finding over this 30-year span in multiple studies gave some opportunities. Oh, before I back up, let me back up just a second. I'll mention the opportunities. You see the picture right here. There was a summit on discipling, nurturing, and reclaiming. And as a result, they asked for a presentation based on this study. And it ended up in a book that the General Conference published on this topic. But perhaps more significantly, the results of that publication resulted in a request for a 30-minute presentation at the General Conference Annual Council, which, as any of you have been to the Annual Council know, that that's prime time to get 5 or 10 minutes to talk about something is significant, but to get 30 minutes to talk about a research study and the result of Adventist education and how it relates to accession and retention was a significant output or difference. So, just a few examples that your theme of the conference is well chosen. Our data does make a difference. The data that we collect and that we share can make a powerful difference. But I'd like to take that idea and I'd like to move across to something perhaps even more important. And I'm sure you'll be talking about this as well, but I'd like to highlight it here. And that is, not only does our data make a difference, but our interpretations make a difference. So, what are we talking about here? Well, I'd like to begin with a simple graphic on the screen. 4 dots. That's your data. What does it mean? Well, obviously, those 4 dots represent a square. Or maybe not so quick. Maybe the 4 dots actually represent a circle. Or maybe they represent a combination of the two. Or maybe these 4 dots are telling us, don't move forward. Or maybe they're telling us, this is the way to go. Head this way. What do the 4 dots mean? The simple conclusion is that data do not speak for themselves. Data always need to be interpreted in order to create meaning. And at the moment you interpret data in order to create meaning, that interpretation is influenced by our worldview. Let me give you some evidence. You've probably seen this picture in some of the introductory psych text. If you look at this graphic, it's quite apparent what it represents. It represents, most people would say, somebody who's gone through some challenges in life. But if we were to look at it from the other side, it suddenly becomes quite apparent that this is talking about a princess. Some people would say before and after marriage, but anyway. Okay. Let me move on to another topic. Here is a single object, a cylinder. If you take light and you shine it on that cylinder from your left, you'll see that it creates the shape of a circle. It's obvious if you're looking at the result of the light shining on the object that this is a circle. But if we look at it, if we were standing over here on the right and shining the light on the object, it will look like it represents a square. If we change the object just a little bit, now depending on from which direction you're looking at it, it looks like a circle, a square, or a triangle. So which one is it? Worldview, your perspective, the way you look at things influences the way you interpret it. You say, okay, well, that's visual. Let's talk about words. Some of you may have seen this short essay called Pretty Ugly. I'd like to read it for you. It says, I'm very ugly. So don't try to convince me that I am a very beautiful person, because at the end of the day, I hate myself in every single way, and I'm not going to lie to myself by saying there is beauty inside of me that matters. So rest assured, I will remind myself that I am a worthless, terrible person, and nothing you say will make me believe I still deserve love, because no matter what, I am not good enough to be loved, and I am in no position to believe that beauty does exist within me. Because whenever I look in the mirror, I always think, am I as ugly as people say? That's a rather clear perspective. So, let's read it backwards. Am I as ugly as people say? Because whenever I look in the mirror, I always think beauty does exist within me. And I am in no position to believe that I am not good enough to be loved. Because no matter what, I still deserve love. And nothing you say will make me believe that I am a worthless, terrible person. So rest assured, I will remind myself there is beauty inside of me that matters, and I'm not going to lie to myself by saying I hate myself in every single way, because at the end of the day, I am a very beautiful person. So don't try to convince me that I'm very ugly. What do you think? Abdullah Shoaib. Yeah. But do you see how we approach this can lead us to a very different understanding? Okay. So, I'd like to kind of wrap up this part with a story, a well-known story from the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 13. Now, this is a significant story because it's actually a story about research. There are actually quite a number of instances where we can see key elements of research in Scripture. And this is one of them. Moses begins by saying in verses 17 and 18, go up through the Negev. That's the desert in the southern part of Canaan at that point. And go on up into the hill country. That's in the north. See what the land is like. So, can you tell me, if we're thinking in a paradigm of research, what has just been defined? Yes. What this is saying or defining is what we would today call the delimitations and the purpose of the study. Delimitations go from here to there. This is your scope. And the purpose of the study is to determine what the land is like. Okay? Moses then goes on. Whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many, what kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? And are there trees in it or not? What would we call this in research? Yeah, it connects definitely to the research question. We might call these the variables, the facets, the variables of the study. These are the things, and of course they're connected to questions here, but they are identifying the variables, the aspects that we are going to study. Okay, but this isn't the end. It continues. Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. That's called the sample. Right. Okay. And then they go, they spend 40 days, they come back. And here is what they said. These are the 12 individuals who went to conduct the research study. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. What do we call that? Yeah. It's a section we would call the presentation of the, it continues on, sorry. The presentation of the data: the people who live there are powerful, the cities are fortified, very large, the Amalekites who live there, it goes and mentions them. It describes where the various people groups live. In essence, they are presenting the data, the findings of the study. But as you know, no research report starts with the findings. Every research study moves on to what does it mean? The implications, the conclusions, the implications, the recommendations. And that's exactly what we find here. Caleb and Joshua, two of the researchers, say, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." The other 10 said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. There are giants there." And we felt like grasshoppers. Caleb and Joshua reply, "The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." The researchers at this point are interpreting the data. And you may have noticed that some of the researchers come up with quite different conclusions than others. And I would like to suggest to you that it's possible to look at the same data and yet arrive at different interpretations because of differences in worldview. Worldview does make a difference. So, I suppose that we could conclude this presentation with a question. Actually, research starts with questions, and as you probably discovered, it also ends with questions. Because every good research study should generate some recommendations for further research, which are in essence questions that we have as we go forward. So I'd like to leave you with a question for you to reflect on, perhaps even grapple with throughout the conference. And this is the question, the key question. How does the biblical worldview inform the research paradigm and research activities? That's the key question. One to think about. Because both our data and our interpretations do make a difference.